Welcome to a new talk in the Understanding 3 conference. It's my pleasure and privilege to welcome Professor Petri Ylikoski with us. Professor Ylikoski is a fantastic philosopher of science, and I learned a lot by reading his work on understanding, and it's a pleasure to welcome him here. And also, I believe there's a private event coming up, so congratulations for that as well. And thank you for making the time for being here with us. Please take it.
So I will start. I probably lose visibility of you, but you will hear me and see the presentation. So a little bit of background. So my background is in philosophy of science, but as you see, I'm currently professor of sociology. My proper field is science and technology studies, so it's basically naturalistic philosophy of science. And if you are wondering what this data lit mean, it means it is a research project I'm running currently, data literacy for responsible decision making. So it's all about AI and data and evidence and things like that. But anyway, one of the biggest things that I've been working on has been a theory of explanation, and understanding has been an important part of that. And I came to my ideas about understanding quite early. So I will start by describing a couple of starting points for my thinking about understanding, but that helps to understand why I have the notions I have. So I will start with my dissertation. Although the dissertation has word understanding in the title, it doesn't deal with the understandings like would have been making sense of causal explanation. But anyway, in that book, you don't have to read it, but just to explain the background, I present an account of explanation that is basically start with the idea that explanation will answer the question, and you can specify the question what you are explaining by bringing up contrasts. And then explanation runs by causal difference making or constitutive difference making, depending on the case. And then I try to make sense of mechanisms and so on. And this led me look for a bigger picture about theory of explanation. So I wanted something that would characterize more general goal of explanatory activities, because if you take this erothetic question theoretical approach to explanation, then explanation is quite specific thing. You can specify what is the contrasting question you are answering. That's the explanation. So you want to have notion that capture a more general goal, what we are after in science, explanatory knowledge, understanding, something like that. Also, I wanted to make sense of the relation between explanation and prediction. And also I had this methodological idea that if I have a good theory of explanation, it should also be able to explain why people find competing theories appealing. So explain away their support. And I needed resources for that. And then I also thought that we should have some handle how to improve explanatory practices in the sciences. In my case, social sciences. So I look at the literature on theory of explanation. And it turns out that people are talking about understanding, but it's usually mentioned once or twice in the beginning of a book or an article. So you have here Hempel, Michael Friedman, Wesley Solomon, all talking about understanding and basically meaning same as explaining things, but not using that understanding as any a significant concept. So it's just everyday concepts that you can throw around when you are talking about explanation, just to be not to be stylistically boring. But then it started to emerge that understanding is coming more important. So the most important thing about the book about explanation for the last 30 or 40 years is probably James Woodward's Making Things Happen. And there he, I think, presents important argument, and I think this is a novel argument in a theory of explanation context. This is the argument from epistemic accessibility. And he basically argues that it's a plausible constraint, that the explanation is that it must be something that provides understanding. And he's using this idea against covering law theory, unification theory, and various sorts of ideal explanatory text accounts of explanation. So there's a condition on theory of explanation. It should explanation is something that be grasped or recognized. because many of these hidden structure theories, as I call them, are postulating things that people don't have access. They're kind of ideal explanatory text or something like that might not realize anywhere, or the unification cover up. People don't have to go to those details. But anyway, this raised the question, what is understanding? So I kind of started a bit puzzled about it. Then I had another cue. And this is the phenomenon of illusion of depth of understanding. And this is basically probably everybody is familiar with it. So you have an idea how detailed and deep understanding you have of things, and then you try to explain them. Then it turns out your understanding is much more shallow. So basically, this might be exaggeration, but your idea of explaining how a helicopter works, basically you think that you can tell this extremely detailed story, but then you basically can just say that there's something spinning and lifting the helicopter. And this came out from the kind of a research paper. This was extremely influential on me. The Rosenblit and Keel misunderstood limits of folk science, an illusion of explanatory depth. And they talk about this sense of understanding, kind of intuitive feeling that we have when we are assessing an ability to provide explanations. And they make a general claim that people feel that they understand the world in far greater detail, coherence, and depth than they actually do. And then they also argue that this is specific to explanatory knowledge. It doesn't work in the same way with narratives, skills, and so on. So this is not a case of general overconfidence. This is kind of specific problem people have with explanatory knowledge. And to demonstrate that they have an ingenious experimental setup. And I found this extremely interesting. And of course, we could follow that kind of a research on explanatory cognition further. But for me, the key questions was these people are talking about sense of understanding, but they are not defining what they mean by understanding. So there's kind of underlying notion what this sense of understanding is about. And second, I'm a philosopher of science. So I was interested in, this is about folk science, everyday people understanding explanations in a textbook. But could we have similar phenomenon in science? Because this would be highly interesting, because we could use this as a kind of a leverage for introducing philosophy of science tools for scientists, and especially social scientists in my case. Because much of the debates in the social sciences are about illusory explanations provided by competing theories and so on. And so they are accusing each other of having illusory understanding. So having kind of a naturalistic theory of cognition and then theory of explanation might be very useful in this context. So I was thinking about various reasons for this. So first, scientists are using basically the same cognitive systems as everybody else. So it would be surprising that if we have this kind of a metacognitive device, a sense of understanding, that they will kind of not use it, or they would be able to calibrate it perfectly. Second, what is surprising, actually, as an empirical fact, that although philosophers of science and scientists talk so much about explanation, in science, actually, there's very little explicit attention to explanatory practices and standards. Think about publication standards. There are detailed rules how to present data and whatever, and how to discuss ethical constraints. But then no advice on how to provide explanations or where to present. They are somewhere in the discussion section or something like that. And same thing in education. So this gives a lot of room of kind of ambiguity about what is explanation and what is explained and so on. Thirdly, scientists are facing much more difficult tasks. So they are not kind of we are not testing whether they know the textbook answer. They cannot use correct expert opinion as a benchmark when they are thinking about whether their theory can explain something, or what are the kind of explanatory merits of the theory that they are advocating. And finally, but also they have to rely on others. So much of the knowledge is based on the kind of a trust on others, based on epistemic interdependence. So they don't really know all the stuff that goes into their theories or their background assumptions. And finally, I think this is quite important. When scientists are evaluating their theories and models, they are not kind of basically, they are not focused on its current kind of epistemic status, its current explanatory powers, but its future expectations about how promising, how fruitful it is. So they're basically when they're making claims about theories and their explanatory powers, they are making claims about future. And evaluating future merits is, of course, much more difficult or maybe impossible than current evaluating current performance. So you can have a wishful thinking, highly unclear optical evaluation. So I was kind of motivated. So I then kind of started to think about this, and then came about this Amsterdam conference about understanding. Everybody probably knows this book. It took place 2005. Understanding was in the title, so I thought, okay, I will kind of articulate what I have in mind for this presentation. So I came up with this idea of inferential theory of understanding, where basically understanding is an ability, and then I try to demonstrate that illusion of depth of understanding is also relevant for science, and then try to kind of provide some hypotheses, what could be sources of it, and then maybe a couple of ideas how to improve explanatory practices. So now I'm going to kind of present the basic ideas of the theory. So when I started to think about this understanding, I had in mind, had read a lot of Wittgenstein as a younger, and Wittgenstein was talking about understanding a meaning of an expression, and he made a point, and he called this grammatical point, that understanding a meaning of a word is not really having a certain kind of experience, sensation, or state of mind. It's kind of something that we attribute and evaluate whether somebody understands the meaning of the word by public criteria. So it's not something in your mind that is crucial, but whether you can use that word properly. You make right sort of inferences with it, you use it in the right context, and so on. And I thought this idea is important also when we are thinking about understanding as an ability to provide explanations. So although it might well be that it's a causal condition for having understanding is to have some kind of mental representation, understanding itself doesn't consist of having mental representation because we are accessing it basically on these public criteria. What we can do, how we can demonstrate our understanding rather than what we have in our minds. And this has also an advantage. It allows that we don't have to confine understanding the mind. So we can expand understanding by having tools, all kinds of surrogate representation, external representation, and so on. So this makes salient to thinking about models as extended cognition rather than trying to figure out how all this stuff happens in the mind. I will come back to that later. Okay, so my basic idea was that I had this basic idea that, okay, explanation about causal, constitutive, and maybe mathematical dependencies, which is nowadays quite common idea, not so common 20 years ago. But anyway, I started with that, and then I thought, okay, if we want to have kind of a hypothesis, a kind of theory, what is understanding? The easiest way is to have it kind of as an ability to make correct what-if inferences about the object. So what-if inferences, I mean kind of counterfactual inferences. What would happen if something happens? Many of these counterfactuals might be some things that we cannot actually realize, but they would still kind of describe dependencies. And with this account, you have understanding coming in degrees, but it's because it's an ability. You can kind of easily compare how many correct what-if inferences you can make, and so on. And also with this background theory of causation, you have kind of a nice explanation for why we have explanatory preferences we have, and then we can trace it to agency. And I really like this because many of the theories of explanation, like unification, covariant log theory, didn't really have a kind of a explanation why we have preferences for kind of explanatory knowledge we have. Okay, so this was the basic idea. Then we could articulate the idea that understanding is an ability, and if it's an ability that can be kind of publicly assessed, then it's something that we can demonstrate in favorable circumstances. So we can do things with the object of understanding. So we can predict or anticipate a behavior, and we can interact with it successfully, control, collaboration, repairing, building, and so on. So in one sense, if we are not focusing only on explanatory understanding, we could have this kind of practical understanding that we can demonstrate by doing things with the object of understanding. And this basic idea also, I think, works with people in a sense that we can understand people if we can successfully anticipate their reactions, we can successfully communicate them. So when we say something, then we are correlate can anticipate how they react to it, how they take it, and this makes possible to successful collaboration and maybe correction of misunderstandings and so on. But then when we are thinking about explanation, it's something that we communicate. So that's about explicit knowledge, theoretical knowledge. The basic idea is that understanding gives you an ability to explain. But I think this can be other dimensions. Originally, I had the idea that I will explore them more, but that somehow I didn't have time for that. Maybe I should have. But yeah, I had in mind kind of a contrast. Think about a car mechanic who can fix the car's engine, and then we have a physicist, or maybe engineering physicist who knows how the engine works. Both of them have an understanding of the car. Car mechanic cannot necessarily explain how the engine works the way it works, but still he has understanding that might not be explicit because he can fix it and kind of modify how the engine works and so on. Whereas the scientist, physicist might not be able to fix the car, but can still explain how it works and so on. So we could have this kind of different dimensions of understanding here. And also in this, thinking about these ways as what if inferences makes easy to kind of compare understanding. Of course, you can have a kind of probably you have to have a threshold. So just being able to do just one correct inference about the object, that might not be enough. But I don't think there's kind of general philosophical solution to this problem. What is the kind of boundary? So that depends on context and expectations and so on. But still, we can make a comparative claims about kind of how many what if inferences you can make. But this is not just kind of a numerical quantitative comparison, because of course, what really matters is the importance of the what if inferences, and what is important depends on the context. Also, I think in this view, the advantage is that you can always specify which aspects of the phenomena you can understand. And then this brings us to the ideas about expanding knowledge. This fitted nicely with my other ideas about explanations. For example, the idea of presuppositions. So we have change of presuppositions, and when we have expanded understanding when we can answer questions about presuppositions of our answers to the questions and so on. Also, the idea that when we integrate knowledge, which is the basic idea behind unification theory of explanation, we might improve our inferential reach, and that kind of explains away kind of intuition that some people have with the unification theory. Also, with this view, the way you represent your knowledge, it might be highly relevant for its kind of inferential reach and the reliability of your inferences. So it's not just about substance, it's also about how it's represented. And finally, knowing the limits of understanding, we could phrase this as an important dimension of understanding. So this is kind of a basic idea about how to link understanding to the growth of knowledge and comparison about it. But then we have this other part. So we have the understanding, and then we have the sense of understanding. And then this is a tricky. So this is some kind of feeling or sensation or sense. I have found very good phenomenological descriptions of it. Might have just missed them, but this is probably very difficult to describe. Here I'm calling it a feeling. When I've been talking about this thing in Finnish, and the most natural translation to sense of understanding is something like feeling of understanding. This is Finnish, and then people have started to complain that this is not really feeling. It doesn't, so on. So this might be controversial, but anyway, it's some kind of a sense we have that we are now understood something, or we are about to understand something. I think this is extremely important from the point of view of our cognition, because it's part of metacognition. So it regulates our learning, our search for new knowledge, all kinds of knowledge-based activities. So kind of provides kind of us to kind of intuitively estimate our ability to explain, control, to do things with things, and kind of signals when we need to search for more information, where we can stop, and also it probably has a social dimension, is that it kind of guides us to aspects of things that we might have to rely on others. But second thing is that it provides motivation. So there's something about this feeling, I will get it soon, that kind of motivates us to do things. And there has been some theorizing about this kind of as a kind of biological drive to seek for explanation. I'm completely satisfied with those, but anyway, I think there's this motivational aspect. But the key point is that sense of understanding is a crucial, but we shouldn't confuse it with the understanding, which is sense of. And its role is metacognitive. And what is the kind of regrettable is that in psychology, the studies of metacognition are only starting, so we don't really have very sophisticated theories of metacognition that would fit in this context. But anyway, the important point about sense of understanding is that it can be highly unreliable, in a sense that we can have false sense of understanding. Here we have pictures of UK adults who were asked to explain by drawing how bicycle works. And you can see they are quite unbicycle-like. So we can have a false sense of understanding, in a sense that we overestimate our ability to explain. But also, we can have understanding without sense of understanding. So there's a psychological phenomenon of implicit learning, but we can also come up with other examples where people acquire knowledge, understanding without noticing it. So it's kind of surprised that they can actually explain something. And I think this is I think both sides of the coin. And probably there are contexts where the sense of understanding systematically fails. This is probably true of most of the human cognition. But also, I think it's important to be talking about in sense of a calibration that's just being unreliable, because it might also be that there are some context where our sense of understanding is kind of working other way. So we underestimate our understanding, but that's kind of a theoretical possibility. But okay, but then we have this older discussion. G.D. Throat already, I think in 2002, had a paper about sense of understanding, and he was suggesting that we should give it up in science. And I think my answer to Throut would be to point out that first, this sense of understanding is highly embedded in our cognition, so it might not be possible for scientists to give it up. Of course, we might try to replace it when we are evaluating explanations. But second, its role is essential. So this regulation of our cognitive activities is fundamental, and we have to have something to replace it if we want to give up the sense of understanding. Also, I think that Trout's arguments were based on kind of a wrong sort of psychological experiments, because he was basically generalizing the results about overconfidence rather than based as explanation-specific studies like done by Frank Keel and others. But then there's a question whether we could calibrate our sense of understanding better, and this is something I hope that I could contribute in the later publications, but looking back, haven't happened that much. But anyway, I want to look at one thing before I stop, and that's use of external representation, especially models and simulations, because this has been a relevant topic for my other research, and this has been an area where I have been applying this idea of understanding. So I already mentioned that this inferential theory of understanding doesn't privilege mental representation. So you don't, when we are talking about models, they can be mental models, but they could also be physical objects, sets of equations, computer programs. It doesn't really matter. They are models if they're surrogates for making inferences. And as they don't have to be models, then we can kind of accommodate this idea of extended cognition. So what matters is the ability to make what-if inferences about the object of interest, not where the model is located or how we analyze it. And then when we were thinking why scientists are using models, I think there are kind of three reasons for it. So first is that forces to be more explicit about assumptions. This is quite clear. If you look at the process when social scientists, for example, or biologists are building their models, in the model building process, they become come to explicate a lot of their assumptions, and they basically find about things that they have been assuming but haven't really been articulating. Second, using external representations like computer models and so on makes inferences more reliable, in contrast to the inferences we do with the mental models, and then they easily expand the scope of correct what-if inferences we can make from our assumptions. But anyway, so this is the basic idea of models. But models can give rise to a specific sort of illusion of understanding, and this is confusing the model of a phenomenon with the phenomenon of the model, meaning that when we put a lot of effort to understanding how the model works, and we correctly feel like our sense of achievement when we achieve certain sort of inferential fluency with the model, we might end up making kind of a illusory, getting an illusory impression that we also understand the target of that model. So especially when the theory is very abstract, and there are a lot of confounding factors. Think about, for example, economic theories or kind of models that social scientists build about social processes. It's extremely difficult to actually evaluate the model because it's not really comparable to the direct observation, because a lot of confounding factors that are not included in the theory, and then the relation, because the point of the theory is understand something about basic mechanisms rather than how any actual system works. So this can give you kind of illusion of depth of understanding. And also I think it's important because since the beginning in these debates about understanding, Henk de Recht has been kind of a pioneer here, and he had this well-known idea of intelligibility. And I think although people have been pointing out this point since the beginning, I remember that it was raised in this 2005 conference, and he still haven't kind of responded that criticism. I think it might be that his idea of intelligibility is based on the kind of the same kind of a confusion between model and the world we understand with that model. So what does the understanding the model consist of? So it's basically the ability to manipulate the inferential apparatus. So you understand how the model properties change as a result when you change the assumptions. So, and when you can do this, then you can kind of solve the model, kind of bring about certain kind of a result. You can adapt the modeling framework or the model to novel situation. You can anticipate what kind of things you can include in the model, how they work together, and then you can make a judgment about which are most crucial parts of the model in terms of its outcomes. And this is something that you acquire kind of by building the model, but also kind of playing around with it. Social scientists are talking about toying with the model or playing with the model. Sometimes some people call it conceptual exploration. But anyway, you acquire a kind of ability to do things with the model. And this is a very crucial step in using the model to understand the world. But it's different from using it to understand the world. So basically, you understand the dependencies in the surrogate system, be it a computer simulation or mathematical model. And of course, you can understand the model in different degrees. But then when you are applying the model to the external world, it's basically just a device for making inferences. So my colleague Jaakko Kuorikoski has articulated this more, but we shouldn't try to understand these models in terms of representation, but rather than kind of inferences they allow. Because most of these models, at least the ones we have been analyzing, are selective representations, so they are not intended to be full representation of any empirical system, and so they only try to capture some mechanism and its contribution to the kind of system dynamics. And second, they are not shouldn't be treated as kind of a sets of sentences about the world, because there are many assumptions that are not used to draw conclusions about the target. So they have only kind of this auxiliary role. They make things tractable. They enable our inferences rather than reflect substantial assumptions about the world. So many of the abstractions, idealizations, and things like that have this kind of role. And how these are handled is not by kind of directly thinking about whether they are true or not, but demonstrating their irrelevance, basically, to the outcomes that we are interested in by doing what the models usually call robustness analysis. So, and I think this gives rise to very important observations. So the unit of analysis is not really a single model that is compared to reality, but we have a cluster of related models. And on the basis of these models, what remains in robust in inferences we make from them and so on, this is something that we basically then use as a basis for inferences or predictions about the world. So this is highly selective use of the surrogate to make claims about the world. So this idea of cluster of related models, it's quite important, because it's kind of helps you get rid of the idea that we are dealing with a single representation, or that there would be kind of a correct theoretical model for any specific system. And it helps you to think about the models in terms more like experiments. With experiments, you have a problem of kind of how you extrapolate from highly simplified experimental setting that you have in a lab to the real world. Basically, the model is the same. You have a highly simplified surrogate system, and then you are figuring out how and what kind of inferences you can make about it that also apply to the world. So it's basically kind of an extrapolation task. And it's usually the case that only inferences that you are making, although your model is numerical, are qualitative. And I think it's something that haven't yet been kind of analyzed by philosophers yet. But anyway, this was kind of a very brief description of the kind of basic ideas of the inferential theory about understanding. But as kind of final point, kind of methodological point, because well, nowadays I'm a socialist, so I kind of have a kind of external observer's position towards philosophy. And I find it somehow strange that when I was starting to think about understanding 20 years ago, beginning of the century, it's great to be able to use this kind of grand notions. There wasn't kind of a thing called understanding. There were some philosophers who were talking about understanding, but there was not kind of phenomenon of understanding. But now we have a lot of people analyzing understanding, of course, different ways, and they have theories about it. But it's somehow kind of interesting that it has emerged as object. And what I think, the thing I'm kind of thinking about, how much our philosophical intuitions about understanding are actually informed by earlier theories rather than any actual things related to understanding, if there's such a thing. I'm thinking about this because a similar thing I think had happened with the explanation. So my kind of way of thinking about understanding has been from the beginning that I have thought it's kind of theoretical concept that I kind of introduced. This kind of, it was a notion that was available. I thought that, okay, it connects nicely with everyday usage, but I thought that I wouldn't regard linguistic evidence, for example, as kind of relevant evidence, because it's mainly a theoretical concept that is evaluated not by kind of a philosophical or linguistic intuitions, how well it applies to kind of everyday use of notion of understanding, but how useful it is as a theory. And so you evaluate it by its consequences. And this is basically the reason I have kind of stuck with this notion of understanding, because I thought it helped me to kind of develop ideas about explanations that are kind of in certain sense fruitful and powerful, in the sense that I've been able to provide an account of explanatory power or explanatory depth in 5 dimensions, utilizing the theory, explaining the appeal of mechanisms and also illusions of understanding related mechanisms. So in a broader word, I'm mostly known for advocating mechanism-based theorizing in the social sciences, but it's quite often a surprise to people that I'm not really thinking that idea of mechanism is any kind of deep idea about causation or explanation, because I think it can be explained with other notions, but I still advocate for mechanism-based theorizing. But also it has helped to, this theory also helped me to kind of develop account of explanatory value of how possibly explanations, and of course, most crucially, help to understand and develop kind of approach how to think about models, simulations, and other external representations which are crucial in science. And so I think the proper way of analyze, kind of evaluating an account of understanding would be its kind of a theoretical utility. And of course, you can have a different opinion about the quality of these results, but I think that's my kind of a meta philosophical thinking about how theories of understanding should be evaluated. But I guess this is a place to stop. I covered a lot of stuff and was brief on many things, but maybe that gives you a lot of things that you can ask. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much to Professor Ylikoski, and I'm sure everyone in the audience joins me in using the applause button. And thanks so much once again. And I see we already have a question from Dr. Martina Zottas. Maria, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much for your talk. It was really interesting. And I have a question regarding the role of interdisciplinarity in for this inferential theory of understanding with models. So if you go to the slide number 16, something that I was wondering is whether all these these abilities, whether they have to be all together achieved or they can be some of them, because my question regards interdisciplinarity for the following reason. When you have very heavily mathematical models, one of the main problems is that the mathematician might be very able to fulfill some of these abilities, but still it's not very clear to which extent he's understanding the model in terms of the target system, right? And the opposite tends to happen with other types of scientists. For instance, some sociologists might understand some concepts coming from economics, but not necessarily understands the mathematics behind it. And one good case that you might have here is macroeconomics. So one of the problems is they are very good mathematicians, but at the moment of landing the models in the target systems, they have very much a huge problem. So they have the ability of solving the model, they get new objections, and then they know how to fix the mathematics. They get finer models, and they have a grasp of how to adapt the modeling framework to novel situations, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they have the ability of joining the model with the target system. So they might fulfill some of these abilities, but not all of them. And I was wondering whether this is a challenging for understanding what the inferential account means in these disciplines that recover other disciplines in their practices when applying models, or whether it...
That's very interesting question, and I think it's one of the advantages of this inferential account that, okay, it allows for extended knowledge cognition, but it also allows for distributed knowledge or communal knowledge. So you could basically talk about, rather than a person and the tools, you could talk about what a group understands, in a sense, what kind of inferences it can make as a group, correct what if inferences. And it might be that okay, you have to have the modelers there to actually do the inferences, but you need the other group members to have the relevant background knowledge and so on. So nobody alone understands the things, but together they can provide this set of relevant what-if inferences. So they can collectively know it without any individual knowing. And I think this is an advantage. I once wrote the draft or paper applying these ideas, but it never went anywhere. So maybe I come back to it. But this I think this is highly important. So in extended knowledge, you can have kind of external models and tools or other people as kind of epistemic aids, but then you are central agent. But I think it's more interesting cases where you have kind of multiple agents as understanding as a group. So in Helsinki, we have a lot of people doing theory of social action, and they are analyzing group actions. And so we have had discussions about applying these ideas about understanding the groups and group understanding, but yeah, that's good. That's in the future. But I think the things that you raise are highly important, and I think they can be accommodated within this account.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your talk.
But of course, one additional thing, of course, thinking about the sense of understanding, because that's something that is confined to our mind, how our cognition works. So that's and so it's probably more difficult to find kind of what is analog for the sense of understanding at the group level. So that actually was in a paper kind of the most challenging part, how to think about how people manage this collective sense making about their explanatory abilities.
Thank you.
All right, thanks so much, Maria, for the question and Petri for the answer. Until there are some more questions, I think I'm just going to insert a question of my own. Since we're at this slide, thanks so much for the talk, by the way, very illuminating and brought back some of your earlier work. But since we're at this slide, if we just think of the inferential fluency bit, right? It seems as though if we had a purely formal account of what gets to count as an inference, we could just introduce disjunction an infinity of times, and we'd get a bunch of propositionally valid inferences, right? But clearly that's not what's at stake here, right? Clearly here, inferential fluency is a notion that's somehow meant to track or ability to manipulate models, to be able to use them to explain phenomena and so on. And that seems to relate to some of your work with Petri Ylikoski, I think, about attention and salience and our ability to scaffold given our familiarity with the model in question, and our ability to pay attention to the right, to the difference-making features of phenomena, as Michael Strevens might put it. And all of these seem to be non-inferential specifically, or at least a case could be made that, look, we need to have an argument for why these would be inferential rather than non-inferential, or what the meaning of inference there would even be, right? So perhaps, for instance, here's an argument that they might be non-inferential, right? They pertain to relevance. Salience is a kind of subjective sort of reflection at the level of cognition of relevance in this kind of Sperber and Wilson sense that's difficult to formalize, that's perhaps relative to research agenda, a set of typical problems or paradigms that influence one when one chooses which model to work with, as it were. And so that would seem to be an argument that they're non-inferential in a sense. But if you want to construe fluency or attention or salience or in an inferentialist way, I wonder if you could say a bit more. Thanks so much.
Okay. I think our notion of inference is kind of broad, but we are using in the same sense, let's say, Dan Sperber is using inference. So it's not logical deduction, but it's kind of inferences that you make, your mind makes, and so on. And of course, with the external tools like models, it's kind of okay how you can use this surrogate system to kind of reach conclusions when you make certain set of assumptions and especially when you change the assumptions and then you see how the conclusions change. The salience, I think that's kind of partly related to the, for example, if you think about different ways of representing things, like having different models or visualization and so on. I think the salience is kind of a kind of affordances the tool provides you. So it's kind of make certain inferences easier or kind of something that you like to do, or just kind of somehow kind of so way you represent things might affect what kind of inferences you make. So it's kind of a affordance of the tools or way of representing and so on. I don't know whether I get what you were after when you're referring to salience, but it was good that you raised Jaako's name, because this is pretty much kind of a shared work with Jaakko Kuorikoski. So he's now my colleague at the philosophy department, but I supervise his dissertation, and most of the stuff we have been doing together in different directions. But anyway, this is just to show that many of the papers are joint papers and so on. So this is kind of a surprising kind of a agreement about the basic approach. There are some differences in writing style and so on, but mostly we are kind of on the developing the same idea, and we have been years planning to put this together as a book, but we constantly have scheduling problems.
All right, thank you so much for that, and congrats for the joint project you have with Jaakko. It's quite fascinating, I must confess. All right, please join me